Hello, I'm Dr. Scott Wadier.
And I'm Tommy Welling, and you're listening to the Fasting for Life podcast.
This podcast is about using fasting as a tool to regain your health, achieve ultimate wellness, and live the life you truly deserve.
Each episode is a short conversation on a single topic with immediate actionable steps. We cover everything from fat loss and health and wellness to the science of lifestyle design.
We started Fasting for Life because of how fasting has transformed our lives, and we hope to share the tools that we have learned along the way. Hey everyone, welcome to the Fasting for Life podcast. My name is Dr. Scott Wadier, and I'm here, as always, with my good friend and colleague, Tommy Welling. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Hey, Scott, how are you?
Doing fantastic, my friend. Excited for today's episode and conversation. We're going to be going over a meta-analysis, a systematic review and meta-analysis of randomized clinical trials comparing time-restricted eating, aka fasting, with and without caloric restriction for weight loss. And if I had a soundboard and could do a drum roll, I would insert that sound now. So just imagine it in your head. You're hearing a drum roll here.
Okay, got it.
Because these takeaways are incredibly impactful for us working on our fasting lifestyle. So if you are new to the Fasting for Life podcast, thank you for giving us a shot. Thank you for listening in. And I have a feeling that this episode is going to encourage you to stay consistent with adopting a fasting lifestyle in your day-to-day fasting efforts. If you want to know more about why we do what we do week in and week out, why we have our challenges and our resources and our coaching, and why we do a podcast week in and week out, head back to episode 0 and episode 1. Give them a listen. They give you a little insight into why we do what we do, and ultimately how fasting transformed our lives, and now hundreds and thousands of other people, millions of other folks that have now listened to the podcast. If you are one of those long-term listeners and one of those 4 million downloads, we are so grateful for you to continue to share the message, to listen in and week out, and ultimately to be part of the Fasting for Life journey. So, Tommy, today's conversation around the systematic review and meta-analysis of randomized clinical trials comparing time-restricted eating, aka fasting, with or without calorie restriction. I first looked at this study and I was like, meh, okay, another calorie study. Right? But let's look at what they actually did, and then we'll unpack some of the really cool changes that we saw, and then we'll talk about how we are going to apply this to our fasting lifestyle, because each one of our fasting journeys is a little bit different, right?
Absolutely, it is. So what they did here is this is a really, really cool version of a gold standard of systematic reviews, meta-analyses, where you literally do a complete search within the literature, looking at thousands of various papers that meet these different search criteria, whittling it down to just the ones that meet certain, higher level criteria here. And so for these purposes here, they were looking for records that actually matched just very rigorous studies, only looking within the use of isocaloric, which is where we're going to keep the number of calories the same, or if we're looking at time-restricted eating, but without the use of isocaloric measurements, okay? So
hold on. What I just heard there is to count calories and track macros, or to not count calories and track macros while fasting.
Yeah, because, you can...
Polarizing topic.
Sure, yeah, and one of those ones where like so many people have the question of, well, isn't fasting just another way to reduce calories? Like, isn't that why it works so well? It is definitely part of it, but it definitely doesn't give you the whole picture of the underlying physiology and what's actually happening underneath the surface that can't happen when the calories are the same, but insulin doesn't change very much. Or if we're stimulating insulin all throughout the day with the same number of calories, the processes within your body are very, very different or slow down substantially. And so that's where a lot of these differences come in. So it's really, really cool to see this one actually differentiating between those two important groups here. And when we take a look at outcome measures, they're looking for certain things. What did weight do? What did fat mass do? What did fat-free mass do? What about metabolic markers? What about blood work and blood pressure? All of these things that we would like to have better balance of, more control over, align with our long-term fasting goals and our long-term health span and lifespan goals. As well as just being able to get the weight off. Can we do it in a simple, intuitive, sustainable way that also allows us to keep that level of control and adapt this into a maintenance lifestyle too, not just be concerned with only a fat loss process, which is essentially like the diet mentality, which is why we love fasting, because we can use it for fat loss, but we can also use it for long-term health sustainability as well.
So let's unpack what they did. So 30 randomized controlled trials across the meta-analysis systematic review, 1,341 participants, all adults over 18, either in the overweight or obese category, so a BMI of greater than 25.
Mm-hmm.
The two main things that they were looking at were time-restricted eating versus isocaloric control. So same calories, different timing. And we hear this often. If I'm fasting, I need to make sure I'm getting in all of my necessary daily calories into my eating window.
Yeah.
Versus time-restricted eating versus non-isocaloric controls. So different calories and different timing.
Yeah, kind of letting the calories work out based on the meal timing rather than going, these are the hours that I know I'm going to eat, and I will have to consume this number of calories within those hours. So more like the intuitive method where you get to use your body cues and your hunger cues
satiety
and
signals
cues,
and,
right?
Yep.
Which would be better and is much more realistic. We just may not be so used to it if you're used to counting calories and macros for dieting purposes.
Yeah, 100%. And the outcome measures, they looked at body weight, body fat percentage, fat-free mass, BMI, waist circumference, some anthropometrics, and then ultimately the metabolic markers. So the question here is, are the time-restricted eating benefits or the fasting benefits due to the calorie restriction, circadian timing effects, or both?
Mm.
And we know it's not just black and white, calories in, calories out. When you have insulin resistance, or you have a perimenopausal or menopausal journey, or you have done the diet roller coaster, lost 20, gained 20, lost 20, gained 25, lost 30, gained 35, et cetera, et cetera. That diet roller coaster, the on-off dieting mentality. That's why we talk so much about adopting a lifestyle, working on those underlying habits. That's why we do our 7-day challenges. That's why we have coaching and resources, because we know that ultimately consistency wins in your fasting efforts. But we have such the dieting weight loss world has such a focus on tracking calories, counting calories, and tracking macros that it's hard for some of us to break free from that. So it creates resistance in our fasting efforts. And what this study is going to show is that we can absolutely simplify your life in your fasting efforts and ultimately your weight loss efforts and ultimately your health benefits by pulling one lever, which is fasting.
Right. Simplifying the whole thing, right?
Yeah, simplifying it. So the interventions lasted from 3 weeks up to 12 months. And the eating window, right? So after fasting, your nutrition opportunity ranged from 4 hours to 12 hours. So to us, the 12-hour groups don't even really count as fasting, but that makes the results even that more impressive.
Sure.
So in the control group, the participants did not have meal timing restrictions. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So there were 9 studies that made the diets isocaloric, meaning the same amount of calories. And there were 5 studies where they did not try to keep the calorie count similar. And the differences between the two were really cool.
Yeah. So when we look at like loss of weight, loss of fat mass, I would expect that if we're consistently fasting, that we're going to see some drop there. But I would also expect that if you're controlling for the number of calories, you might see a better effect if the overall number of calories was lower within the time restricted eating group, you might see a more substantial amount of fat loss, right? Mm-hmm. But then if you're taking away the ability for you to actually interpret hunger signals and satiety cues, then you might be kind of missing the mark, which is we have a lot of people come into the challenge or come into coaching or send us an email. And part of what they've been doing is actually matching up like being in an isocaloric environment versus what they were doing before fasting. And then they're like, why am I feeling stuck? And when we take a look and we see these differences here within these two groups, then it starts to kind of answer that question where you can get better results within the simplified version of it, right?
Yep. So big picture, the study supports the idea that TRE decreases intake even under ad libitum, meaning not taking and tracking and counting calories.
Mm.
So I'll say that one more time. And then TRE also showed more metabolic benefit as well. So if we're going to look at the groups that were isocaloric versus not counting calories, let's say it that way, counting calories versus not counting calories, the weight loss in the isocaloric group, so keeping the calories the same with time-restricted eating, so just changing the timing, the total weight loss was about 3.22 pounds.
Okay.
In the ad libitum, so the not counting calories group, time-restricted eating decreased weight by 6.22 pounds, so double.
Wow.
So what did fat mass do? Same results. However, what did fat-free mass do? Doubled.
Wow. So then when it's simpler, it's actually going, it's intuitively being helpful and actually making a bigger difference, but then also not requiring you to be so restricted or so like, dialed into the numbers, right? Tracking everything. And like, which is never an enjoyable part of the process. Like almost none of us enjoy that part of the process.
This is why we say fasting gives you freedom. It simplifies, right? Because the reality is you don't have to do what you were doing that created frustration and it wasn't working in the calorie counting world. And it comes back to the question, do calories matter? Does meal timing matter? Does circadian biology matter? Well, they all matter.
Yeah.
They're all part of the equation. It's not black or white.
But it's kind of counterintuitive because we know of so many folks who are so worried about under consuming during their nutrition window that they're negating.
Am I eating enough is the question.
Right. And it's like, well, do you feel like you're eating enough? And oftentimes they can't really answer that question because just they're thinking about it. I don't want to say they're overthinking it, but they're so concerned with the number of calories that are coming in, which is so not an intuitive thing. It's just something that we've been kind of trained for if you've been on the diet roller coaster for a while. And you can be accidentally, inadvertently, like undoing your caloric deficit, undoing like basically everything that's going to lead to you needing to tap into those long-term fat stores. You can be accidentally undoing that just by trying to match your caloric needs to these, smaller nutrition opportunity windows.
So when we look at the results, it's cool to see that the TRE group in the non-calorie counting group outperformed the calorie counting group. Do both work? Yes. Did we see improvements? Yes. But in the non-calorie counting group, if we're going to talk about metabolic function, labs, long-term health, the non-calorie counting group or the non-isocaloric time-restricted eating fasting group saw improvements in fasting glucose, insulin, cholesterol, triglycerides, and blood pressure.
Wow.
And then in the calorie-controlled group, no consistent metabolic improvements were seen, which puts the TRE, the time-restricted eating, not having to worry and stress about all of that tracking and numbers and all of the stuff, right? And all of the failed attempts in the past, because I failed for years, right?
Right. Me too.
It simplifies that equation. It allows you to have a lever that you can consistently pull without the added necessary tracking and calorie counting, which I think is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, and I have two, potential hypotheses for that. One might be because of the greater reduction in body mass and fat mass that may have led to enough of a change to trigger more of those balancing out and improvements within the blood work. That might have been a contributing factor. But then also what may have been a contributing factor too would be if you're taking the same number of calories, but you're taking them in within a compressed timetable, then you could actually be overeating. Like you could be eating too much too quickly, being overly full,
feeling full, getting the post-meal slump.
Yeah, lethargic, right? You could be giving your body too much to do within a smaller time period, and you might not be feeling great because of it. And we've talked to many people who come into fasting and have that. That's their current situation. Like I've been fasting, but I just don't feel great with it because I don't have enough time to kind of digest my food, and so you're just compressing the same amount of food into a smaller period of time. And that could lead to an over-exaggerated blood sugar and insulin response. It could lead to higher blood pressure. It could lead to more salt retention than you would want, because you're actually retaining more fluids because you're contributing to more glycogen stores and more salt retention, and then less time to actually process through all of these things. That this could all be problematic. And so between those two sets of factors, that may be a lot of the difference there within the metabolic markers too.
So those secondary metabolic outcomes were cool. So the TRE group, the time restricted eating group that was not tracking calories, right? So the non-isocaloric strategies, those ad libitum groups, they saw a 8.35 milligram per deciliter drop. So an 8-point drop in fasting blood glucose. Awesome. So now we're talking going from pre-diabetic to normal, or from normal to optimal, right? Or from diabetic to pre-diabetic, right?
Yeah.
And insulin levels dropped by 6.3 milligrams per deciliter.
Wow.
Not surprising, if blood sugar dropped, insulin dropped as well. Insulin drops, blood sugar drops, area under the curve drops, less volatile blood sugar swings throughout the day, less hunger, less fatigue, less emotional food choices.
More fat burning.
More fat burning. Exactly.
Yep.
And we talked about that on the last episode, where we talked about time to fat burning. So that intentional food choice before you start your fast makes a big difference in how quickly you can get into that fat burning mode. So the other secondary outcomes were total cholesterol, triglycerides, and both systolic and diastolic blood pressure went down. Especially, it says this in the study, especially when it involves involuntary caloric restriction. Fasting as a simplifier, fasting as a tool, as a skill that allows you to continue to see change over time. Even if the scale stalls, you still know that time restricted eating or fasting is moving the needle beneath the surface.
Yeah.
Because if we look at ultimately why people come to fasting, is to lose weight. But why do you want to go ahead?
Or keep it off.
Or keep it off. Why do you want to lose weight? Well, ultimately, we know that being at a healthy weight prevents disease, prevents chronic lifestyle conditions, decreases all-cause mortality, right? We know that. So ultimately, beneath the surface, we have a greater reason. Maybe it's that yearly conversation with your doc about your numbers, about a lab being high, and having that conversation where you don't really want to have the options that they're providing to you in forms of medication. So fasting is an absolute simplifier, even taking out of the equation the movement on the scale.
Yeah, which I really like that idea, because then you have the much more important sustainable things in mind when you're going through your fasting journey, less concerned with the number on the scale, which you oftentimes can't control even when you're doing everything right. But typically, the more consistent you are, the more likely you are to see positive improvement in what the scale says over time. And so if you think about this as a marathon rather than a sprint, you're going to have a better mindset for long-term results anyway. Where I'm looking at this as a multi-decade journey, not a how quickly can I get the 20 pounds off or the 50 pounds off or whatever it is, because it probably took years, if not decades, to put the weight on. If we can think about it in the fact that it's not a race to get it off. I mean, we'd like to get it off as quickly as possible, and let's pull all those levers. But at the same time, we need to keep that pressure off, where we're judging ourselves based on what we're doing as just an immediate reflection on what the scale says. That's not going to be helpful. And it's also, the scale's not always going to be telling you, yes, you're doing the right thing, or no, you're doing the wrong thing. Blood work can be improving, metabolic markers can be improving. You could feel a heck of a lot better and be setting the stage for the next down wave on the scale right now. but that could take days or weeks of consistency. And if you're feeling better throughout that process, you should keep doing what you're doing rather than taking feedback from the one-dimensional scale at that point.
And the third category that they looked at was, so they looked at the anthropometric changes, the lab markers, the body weight, the fat-free mass, and the fat mass.
Mm-hmm.
But the last component to adopting a sustainable fasting lifestyle is really the circadian biology involvement, right? So we talk a lot about this recently since the beginning of 2025, in that our body has a natural rhythm of hormones like cortisol production, which is good for you. It gives you energy. It wakes you up in the morning. It's your stress response system. You have your blood sugar regulation, your insulin. And to really achieve those long-term metabolic health improvements, we need to be looking at all three of them. So when you're looking at the metabolic benefits of the circadian component, we are now shifted our focus to, if you're not seeing consistent efforts and the scales bumping up and down and you're just not seeing the changes that you want to see, you've hit the dreaded plateau, simply by moving your TRE to an early TRE window, and we've done multiple episodes this year on it alone, and we've talked about it in the past too. But that is going to be tapping into even greater physiology and the fact that your insulin sensitivity is greater in the morning than it is at night.
Absolutely.
And even without that intentional isocaloric caloric calorie counting restriction, you're going to see the weight loss improvements, body composition improvements, and you'll see better sleep. You'll see better fat oxidation. And you're just going to see that the feeling around the decisions you're making is going to actually start to feel good, because your body beneath the surface is changing, making those day-to-day decisions around your fasting and your food choices that much easier.
And it's working better. It's easier to get into fat burning mode when your insulin sensitivity is up to 30% better the next day, because you had better quality sleep. You had the sleep that you actually needed, which if you think about it, you set the stage for that the day before, which meant that if you had a smaller dinner, or maybe you didn't have dinner that day because you had more of your calories, more of your nutrition earlier in the day, like during the lunchtime, or maybe you close that nutrition opportunity window by 3 p.m. that day rather than by 7 or 8 p.m. That's a lot better for your sleep. And then that leads to better fasting results the next day, fewer cravings. Everything's better balanced. Your blood sugar is more optimal when you wake up the next day and continue to go, through your next day's sleep cycle as well. It's going to continue being better balanced, which means insulin is going to be better under control. It's going to be a smaller area under the curve, lower average insulin levels the next day as well, which means more time spent in fat burning rather than in carbohydrate metabolism, and kind of going in that back and forth, leading to scale volatility, leading to willpower and motivation volatility as well.
And this is something we hear often, is that later day intake. Like, man, I'm just hungry at night. Like, I have trouble closing my window.
Sure.
And that time restricted eating, that fasting lever, really helps to limit that later eating. Even if you're just moving your dinner from 7 p.m. to 5 p.m. Right? And that's because that late day intake may lead to that greater insulin resistance and disturbances in fat metabolism compared to eating foods earlier in the day.
Yeah.
So we've got three main players, right? We've got the timing of your meals, the content, and the calorie count of your meals. And then we've got the how does this align with our body's natural physiological state, where it's more apt to be able to burn that energy more efficiently and effectively earlier in the day.
So, I mean, if we're talking about what could we do to kind of optimize the process a little bit, what can we take away? What action steps do we have? I mean, one would be just looking at your recent OMAD, your recent one meal a day, or your recent like smaller nutrition opportunity window, and like, did you worry too much about the number of calories that were coming in? It could be on the high side, it could be on the low side. If you're a long-term dieter, you might be used to taking your caloric recommendations and trying to slice off as much as possible, thinking that I can only get results on the scale when I'm really very low calorie, when I'm really restricted, which then can cause a whole host of issues, both psychologically and physiologically. Or On the other side of that, could you be trying to squeeze in too much food or too much nutrition across your nutrition opportunity? That could be problematic as well. So are you ignoring hunger and satiety cues in favor of hitting your calorie count? Because what would be a better lever to pull there would be maybe setting a protein goal for yourself, making sure that you hit that on a consistent basis rather than overall number of calories, because your body can't really mess up protein and it doesn't happen by accident. But if we need to squeeze in more calories, we typically don't pull the protein lever because it's expensive, it's filling, I have to cook it, it's more thought consuming. Like it's just there's a higher bar to getting in more protein. So typically if we need a high number of calories to come in, oftentimes we're pulling the fat lever because it's so calorically dense, or we're pulling the carbohydrate lever because they're cheap and delicious.
And
so
all over the place.
yeah, right. And easily accessible, right? And so that's again part of why protein doesn't happen by accident, but also why your fasting efforts and your food choices may lead to better results if you take some of the pressure off of just trying to hit these caloric numbers.
And go back and listen to last week's episode too, because we talk about that time to ketosis, time to optimal fat burning. So to wrap up today, if we're going to talk about, if you're looking for like specific macro breakdowns and how we recommend and percent of caloric intake, because that's where you're at and that's the framework that you operate. I'm in a divided marriage. My wife is a tracker and a macro calorie counter, and she gets incredible results, and I'm an intermittent faster, right? So we agree to disagree, but we've also figured out a way to make it sustainable that works for her. Now, every now and then, every 8 weeks inside of our coaching group, and we talk about this during our challenges as well, we do a week where we actually dial it in and see where you're at. And we ask you to actually track and kind of take a pulse of where you're at in terms of your hunger cues and your consumption and your fasting efforts. But
sometimes we need to calibrate.
So yeah, you just need a little recalibration, right? To me, that's doable. Oh, I got to do that a few times a year versus I got to do this every single day. Yeah. Right. And then the results don't reward you in the scale and all the mental stuff that goes on with it. So a simple, sustainable kind of overview of today's conversation, Tommy. If you want a simple, sustainable way to see the scale continually move, know that you're making beneath the surface physiological changes with your metabolic health, choose an eating window. So intention in your fast. Plan your fast for the day. Plan your fast for the week. Here's the kicker. Stick to it consistently. Don't just try it once. Give it a few weeks. Give it a month. Just like when you start working out, you're going to do it, feel it, see it. The first 30 days is the doing. The next 30 days is the feeling. And the last 30 days when you really start to see those body composition changes, right?
Yeah.
So stick to it consistently to keep that motivation up, right? So time restricted eating, aka fasting, will naturally reduce your calories. It will support your body's natural circadian rhythms if you're moving those meals earlier in the day, and you will see the meaningful movement on the scale without the strict calorie counting or complicated skeletons in the closet from our previous failed weight loss efforts. Right? So if you're looking for support, you can head to the show notes. You can grab the blueprint to fasting for fat loss, 20-page PDF. It has some tangible numbers and metrics in there if that's where you're at, if that's helpful. It also has some fasting schedules. If you want an accelerated experience, join our next challenge. We do 7 days, 9 lives. We've 9 live events. We have a bonus pregame warm-up. And we have a coaching call. We're face-to-face answering your personalized fasting and weight loss and health questions. And then we have 7 days of live engagement where we walk you through how to adopt a fasting lifestyle. The coolest takeaway here, Tommy, in looking at this is, do all those things matter, right? Do all those 3 levers matter? Do the calories matter? Does the timing matter? Does the fasting matter? Yes, absolutely. But the fasting will simplify and amplify the weight loss and body composition changes, never mind the metabolic effects as well.
Wow.
So head to the show notes, grab a link, set those fasting timers, put some intentional food choices, go back, listen to last week's episode about time to getting into fat burning and ketosis. Tommy, man, I appreciate the conversation as always, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Bye.
So, you've heard today's episode, and you may be wondering, where do I start? Head on over to thefastingforlife.com And sign up for our newsletter, where you'll receive fasting tips and strategies to maximize results and fit fasting into your day-to-day life.
While you're there, download your free Fast Start guide to get started today. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Fasting for Life.